The only people for me are the mad ones.
The world is filled with the boring and the barely conscious.
And misery loves company.
But we don't have to live this way.
Jessica and I are here to talk to those the system rejects, to radicals and thought criminals.
The ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but push the boundaries of acceptable discourse.
Those who stare reality in the face and dare it to be different.
History isn't made by the timid, and fun is not had by the perpetually afraid.
We are the mad ones.
So let's get to it.
Welcome to the Mad Ones. I'm your yes, I like animal skulls and would love to collect more of them, but no, I am not a serial killer host, Cam Harless. And with me, as always, is your look at all those books behind her, hostess, Miss Jessica Green. How are you doing, Jessica?
I'm really good. They're my husband's physics books. I don't know how to read.
Well, I mean, that there's a very easy joke to be made right there.
Yeah.
But I am not looking to offend the ladies out there because we have a very lovely one coming on the show right now. And as a brash, horrible American with a dirty mouth, I want to extend some politeness. So I'll just go ahead and introduce her.
Don't strain.
Yeah. Joining us tonight is the curator of Burials and Beyond. She's a person to go to if you want to talk about life, death, and the weird bits in between. A newly minted PhD in 19th century Gothic literature and a collector of stories from the odd to the macabre, Miss Kate Cherrell.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
I think it's funny because someone, as Americans, there are different schools of humor when it comes to British people. We are not, we love insulting each other. That's just kind of one of the fun things. It's like cousins that make fun of each other, the Americans in England. And someone had, what was it that they said? I'm already forgetting the point of what I was talking about, and that's not good.
Well, what we can relate on is that we both like to make fun of the French, and I'm always on board for that.
Man, I had an anecdote and I just screwed it up. So I guess you have to take over the show, Jessica, because I failed.
Okay. Well, I do have questions for Kate, actually, because this was such a highly anticipated episode. And I told all of my friends and family and everyone at my church about it. Only I didn't tell them what Kate properly did because I thought she was in mortuary studies. She actually studies Gothic literature. So that cut my questions down by about half. But the first one still applies. And how does such a lovely young girl in the flower of life become interested in death?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna just record that and keep it as my text tone now. Yeah, I've kind of my interest really started with memorialization and cemeteries, and kind of I spent a lot of time as a child, twice a week, being taken around my local cemetery by my granddad, and that sort of grew from that to understanding more about what cemeteries are, and then seeing different cemeteries, different types of burials, and then just a natural sort of flow chart progression. And over the years, I've kind of just maintained and developed that interest. And also when dealing with family bereavements and things like that, getting more involved in the ins and outs of, okay, what constitutes a contemporary funeral? What constitutes a perceived necessity in death? I find endlessly interesting. And then I was fortunate enough to work in a cemetery a few years ago, and that really cemented my ideas of, this isn't just let's look at some pretty headstones. This whole way that we interact with death, what's taboo, what's not, what's changing, what's a good change and what's a bad change, and who's leading these moral crusades. It's an endlessly fascinating field. So I'm always learning something new and always bothering some dead people somewhere.
I'm sure they like to be bothered a little bit. No one's probably talking to them all that much anymore. So was there like a seminal moment for you where you were like, excuse my speech, where you were like, yes, this is it. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life?
I think, to be honest, actually, I visited a a cemetery in Graz in Austria in about 2003, 2004. And it was so different to any other burial ground I'd seen in the UK, because a lot of Austrian cemeteries, and a lot of German cemeteries as well, have a policy of, I think it's after however many decades you're in the ground, I think it's between 40 and 60 maybe, then you have to either renew the plot payment or it goes to someone else, because it's at a premium and they need the income to keep the cemetery looking as beautiful and as crisp and as tended to as it needs to be. And
Sure.
it was that divide, because I'm so used to the little rural cemeteries where, you know, you've got occasionally, if you're lucky, 17th century headstones, and, you know, and older ones from in churches and things. That from that to this is all brand new glistening marble, but marble that's been there since the 19th century. That was the point when I really thought, okay, all my holiday pictures, first of all, are going to be of dead Austrians, and then secondly, I need to know everything about this, and I need to know about why this happens. You know, why do some people get to stay in a grave in perpetuity, and why do others get turfed out or just stacked on top of? And I think once you get your head around something, then before you know it, you're researching safety coffins and green burial sites and, you know, everything in between. So I think that was really the point where I thought, oh, this isn't just as simple as put them in the ground and you're done.
That's a very sort of taboo idea, to exhume someone who's in the ground. At least it is here. And so you're saying they will stack on top of who is previously there. They'll add a new person, or they pull them out.
I think certain cemeteries do. I don't know. I know that in North America and England especially, disinterment is just a horrific idea for so many people.
Yes.
But in Germany and Austria, I think they do disinter and remove them to different graves. I think so. I might be completely wrong. But also in different European cultures, you rent a plot, you know, and when you're decayed, then your bones are removed, especially in places like Greece. There's bodies decay differently in different climates, so it's far easier to repeat this process. So
I see.
There's a big cultural element to it, I think, whereas we just think, no, they're in the ground, leave them. Whereas you have to think, well, how many people are there going to be in this particular area? Because you just can't keep adding more and more space. I mean, granted, more people are getting cremated nowadays, but there's still, you know, a large population that want to be buried. So it does make sense, but it's a real divisive topic, definitely. But yeah, I think the Germans and Austrians have got a good point.
That's fascinating. I have that thought almost daily. I have a very tiny little church in my town, and the cemetery outside of it seems full. And there's obviously parishioners still going to the church. And I thought, well, where are you guys going to go? There doesn't appear to be any room here. So that's actually very interesting. And you're right, more people are cremated nowadays. So it's a little bit, you have other options. But yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't know that they did that. Now I will be doing a Google deep dive.
Yeah, I think with the issue with like crowded churchyards, particularly burial spaces directly attached to churches, that's been overcrowding has been a massive problem since like the late 18th, early 19th century, especially in big cities like London. So when you see today these enormous, really beautiful grand Victorian cemeteries like Highgate Cemetery and Brompton, you know, the ones that are always rented out for films. I think like Sherlock Holmes was filmed in one. You know, they are the Victorian cemeteries. They were constructed because churchyards were just overflowing. Granted, to a point where they were noticeably overflowing with bodies, shall we say? There's so many accounts of femurs sticking out and the smell being so bad in the inner cities that people thought that there was a miasma theory at the time, that people thought that smells such as this were killing the living. So what we have today is these really beautiful Victorian garden cemeteries were born from overcrowding in churchyards and people either not being able to disinter them or remove them, but religiously not really being allowed to. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship, overcrowding, and then these beautiful cemeteries that we think that's what it should be. It's a really interesting sort of duality to death.
Yeah,
I know that, like,
part of the
go ahead.
I was just say part of the reason we wanted to talk to you is because death is such a taboo subject, and along with that, so is dark humor. So dark humor is give or take. I would assume, having spent the time in the subjects that you probably have some appreciation of dark humor. I know
Of course.
that what was it last I guess a year and a half ago, I guess now, my dad passed away, and if it weren't for dark humor, I wouldn't have made it through the funeral. And part of the conversation I think that needs to be had when it comes to death is the practical nature of things. Like, most people don't think about death until it's too late. So, like, my dad, I knew what he wanted when he died. He wanted to be cremated. He wanted to be spread at some point. He wanted to be spread off the back of a motorcycle. I mean, that was my dad. I knew what he wanted. And so when he passed away, I had to essentially fight my siblings in one way or another to get them to listen to what he had wanted. And I just was so glad that we had that conversation, so that I was there to help him have that happen. And so it's like, I'm curious, with how you've looked into these things, how you've studied what I know, kind of what I want to happen, and there are contingencies based on where I am in life. But do you have a preferred way you want to be treated once you've passed? Is there a favorite?
I've always wanted to be buried.
Mhm.
Always. I think I'm the only one in my family for quite a while that's maintained that. But that comes from I love cemeteries so much. Like, I really love them. So like, if I'm dead, like, yeah, I want to be a part of that. I'm sorry that it'll cost more money, that you'll have to get a nice granite headstone, and you'll have to deal with all those costs. But yeah, I absolutely want to be buried. But that's more just sort of my lasting memorial that I'm sure everyone will visit and mourn at. Very
If I
unlikely.
ever get across the pond and that happens, I'll visit you.
Thank you. I want to have a memorial that attracts very dramatic goths from across the country. I want my memorial to be everyone's Instagram photo. So I should start saving, really. But
Go ahead.
I was going to say, but with that, that's the memorial thing is like, that's my shtick. That's what I want. But what I want to happen, like, with my body after I die, I'm quite I'm not precious over it. I would hate to be. I don't want anything invasive. In a sense of preservative, invasive. Like, if someone wants my organs, if I haven't wrecked them by then because I'm having a good go at it, but if it's a case of, we want to embalm her, or we want to do even just the rudimentary things that you do, like in this country, embalming isn't really standard. It's kind of like an additional that's mainly just a cultural thing, or if people are really into having an open casket. But I certainly wouldn't want any of that. I quite like the idea of just letting my body return to the earth. So I wouldn't want an expensive casket, and I wouldn't want anything done to me, because I will go in the ground and I will rot. So don't just shove money in a hole. At least put money on the surface where we can all enjoy it.
And that's why I ask, because when my dad passed away, there's a horrible, like, death lobby in America. And so when he passed away, my siblings wanted to view the body. I was out of town, and for me, I didn't want to view the body. And it was purely because by the end of his life, he was so skinny, and, like, there was so much, I wanted to keep the memory of what he looked like in my head. But when my siblings wanted to be able to view the body, everyone, the doctors, the funeral homes, everyone said, in order to view the body, he has to be embalmed first. Like, they would not let,
like, legally.
Yeah, apparently it was in order to do it legally in Alabama, where we were, they had to embalm him before people could view him. And so it was like $500 something, and I was like, just don't do it. I mean, you could look at them in the cooler. Like there are ways to do this that I'm sure we could get around. But in America, in Alabama, there are a lot of business and corporate interests that lobby the government for special rights and privileges. And so it made me very angry because for me personally, when I pass, like right now, I don't have a home or land that I own. So I would say probably I would want to be cremated and maybe have a memorial headstone put up or something like that. But if I had my own land right now, I would truly want to be planted in wrapped in linen on the tree line with a headstone in my land. That's what I would want. Like that would be that's my death goal, is to be planted in my land someday.
Yeah, I think we're moving towards a more natural way of viewing death and not seeing it as if we see someone who dies from maybe like a wasting illness, or they're just not themselves. I think we're moving away from, no, we want to preserve them because there's some indignity in seeing our loved ones in that state, whereas it's not, they're gone, that's just part of their journey. Whereas I think it's really, really healthy now, like with green burials and things like that, that we're seeing far more. We're seeing beyond the let's make them presentable. It's what they would have wanted, when no one wants that. No one wants to be preserved for one last viewing, when, like you say, you've got so many memories, and then there's so many opportunities to have a more, or just an eco burial as well, and feel something that's more you, rather than a cookie cutter way of burying everyone.
Well,
so there was a
I just
real
really
quick though, before we move on from the embalming thing, because I actually do have a question about it. The number one thing, when I thought that you were in mortuary studies, most of the people from my church wanted to know about the embalming process, because they are of the religious belief that you are to return to your natural state, which is to the earth from which you came. And there was an Orthodox church, I want to say in Washington, that was built, a monastery that was building simple pine boxes, which are much cheaper than the sort of almost car-like metal contraptions that they try to sell to the bereaved. And they also, for the most part, they don't want to be embalmed. And although there is a pressure that happens from doctors and from, these different facilities that handle the dead, you do have the right to resist that. And yes, okay, maybe you won't be able to have an open viewing and other things like that. Is it the same way? Are you finding lobbying interest in England or in the UK that's happening, that's saying you must have these processes done to you? Or because it's maybe an older country with like, death and burial has occurred there for much longer, do you think that preserves the desire to have a more natural burial? And what is it about, our culture? Is it that, we don't want to witness the corruption of the body? We fear our own corruption of our flesh. And so we want to, almost like in an ancient Egyptian way, fill ourselves with chemicals so that we don't rot. And this poor monastery, they were sued by the funeral homes in the area, and they were required by law to stop making these simple pine boxes so that the funeral sellers in the area could continue to make money off of the bereaved. This was a deep concern of most of the people that I talked to when I said, oh, I'm talking to this death expert. Do you have any questions? And they're like, do I have to be embalmed? Well, I think like the laws on that are local and regional. Like, what do you think drives that?
I think you've nailed it. It's financial interest. I think the way, I think because the UK is quite small, and because we are primarily a secular country. So I think there's religious interests. I think religious lobbying and financial lobbying within the death sphere can quite often get really intertwined. So people are presented with an idea that if you're not embalmed, that somehow makes them less pious, or less godly in a way. So I think it's the way things, from what I've researched, the way things happen with the preparation of the dead in America is primarily just led by financial interest, but
Okay.
also, from what I understand, there's no legal requirement across all US states to be embalmed. I think there are only national laws when it relates to bodies being flown from, like, between states or from different countries into the states. And then I think there's a few guidelines around that where, for preservation's sake, they do ask for the body to be embalmed. But there's certainly nothing, to my knowledge, like that in the UK. As I say, embalming is still offered, I think, by 90% of funeral homes. But the general trend in the UK seems to be, financially, again, but pushing green burial options. There are so many new woodland burial grounds and like non-religious ministers, people like that, doing the whole package for people. So there's a real removal of death in the church and death in business to an extent. So things are offered, but mainly people aren't embalmed and they don't have to be. However, for all of the let's say the baddies, the sort of people that are stopping affordable coffins, which should be, it's a human right. I think it really is. So for all of that, there's people with a financial interest in quite elaborate funerals and elaborate burial rites. There are also people with vested financial interests in green burials and in more simplistic burials, and holding a more righteous ground, holding the perceived higher ground, when really they also have quite hefty career interests.
It's an excellent point.
Yeah. So there's no happy medium at the minute, I don't think.
Do you think, because I'm told by a lot of people, and I don't know if they know what they're talking about or not when they say this, but they say, well, the reason you have to be embalmed is because when you rot, your body can pollute the groundwater wherever you're being buried at. And I thought, okay, but like we have, cemeteries, have had cemeteries for a long time. Now, granted, I know like in India, for example, when they would have mass burials near river systems, it would pollute the water and there would be problems with cholera.
Just in the river.
In the river, right. And so that's like direct, newly decaying body in the water, straight up. But is there any truth to this idea that if you're placed 6 feet under the ground, that you will somehow corrupt the natural environment around you as you return to the earth?
If you're not embalmed, was that what they're saying? If you're not
embalmed, that you will present a pollutant.
No, that's
good.
I mean,
utter rubbish. It's a natural.
The amount of chemicals that they put in people, you would think that is what would be dangerous to groundwater.
Sure.
Exactly. If you're not embalmed, you're fine. You're hardly going to be a big pollutant. You just rot and become part of the soil. And to be honest, a lot of coffins as well, depending on the soil of the cemetery or the burial space where you are, a lot of coffins are preserved for centuries. I've seen coffins in crypts from, what was last one, 16th century, that are perfectly intact, just with skeletons in, but it's just a natural process. Things rot, you're fine. The church and crypt didn't fall into the ground in a big fireball. However, when you do embalming and you're putting a lot of quite large amounts of chemicals like formaldehyde into the body, there have been instances in the States of the amount of formaldehyde in the water table being slightly higher in certain areas. So that has been noticed. I don't know to what extent it would ever be like a genuine threat to people's well-being, because I don't think it's to such an extent that it would be noticeable in any water supply, but I think it has bbeen noticed. But if you're put in the ground just in a shroud, or if you're just chucked in, just because you just think, no, this is me, this is how I want to go, then you're absolutely fine. There's certainly the people living nearby aren't going to suddenly stand up one day and then keel over because you rotted nearby.
Right. Right.
And that's
good
one
to know.
The,
that was the main question. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's one of the things that I think has been I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, but there's this lie out there, as I've perceived it and as I've seen some people talk about it in the past, that they view the recently dead as completely diseased and disgusting and not something you can touch or be around, etc. when in fact, I mean, it does take several days for the decomposition to happen, but with the ability to clean, to keep things up, the dead body is not necessarily as deadly as people make it out to be.
No, not at all. They're no more dangerous as they were than they were alive. And I think you're right, though. People have this sudden fear that when the person has gone, as it were, that then they're just left with this corruptive force within their house. And it's certainly not. I'm a big advocate of people interacting with their loved ones, whether it be, like you say, like cleaning or just keeping them in their house overnight, which you can do, with, and all you need is just a few ice packs. Even that you don't necessarily always need. There's interacting with that person and showing that care in death, I think, can be really, really healing and a really positive process for a lot of people. It is scary. It's very jarring to be near a dead body, especially someone that you love and have known for a very long time. It's horrible, but to get through that initial sort of gut punch, I think having a very healing, very gentle process of caring for them and not just immediately medicalizing that and handing it over to professionals and sort of approaching the body as like medical waste of sorts. I think that's a far healthier way. And I think as soon as you realize that there's nothing dangerous, there's nothing scary about a dead loved one, then you can kind of get your head about you with different areas of planning the funeral, planning the grave, and you'll think more for their interests, and you'll go less onto autopilot and be less likely then to arrange things that they wouldn't have wanted and certainly that you don't want. So I think it's a good way to avoid unpleasant situations down the line as well. But I think it really does have benefits, definitely.
We have a tradition in the Orthodox Church of kissing the reposed. And a lot of people find that a little bit jarring, but it is part of our funeral tradition that we will kiss the body because we recognize this is the person. It's, the spirit is gone, but this is not, this is not just some lump of nothing anymore. This is still the loved one, and we do kiss them. And a lot of people find that tradition a little bit jarring. And when I first became a catechumen in the Orthodox Church, that was one of the things that kind of made me go, whoa. And then as I became more understanding of the traditions and the beliefs, I was like, this does make perfect sense to kiss our reposed, to give them that final kiss, that final sign of love, that, okay, you are what I will become. And I kiss you, and I recognize this is a natural part of your life. And I actually find that to be quite a beautiful tradition. Yeah,
absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Cam. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just going to say, I do want to talk about my experience with my dad, because Jessica's heard it once before. But it was on an episode that didn't make it to the public because, like I said, I was not there mentally.
There were some edibles involved.
Silly reasons. But what was incredible about, and I don't mean incredible in a good way, but what was incredible about this process, about his death, about the funeral, the cremation, and all of that, were the vast differences in response from people. So like me, I was more detached. I was making jokes because that heals my soul. And then my brother and sister were absolutely wailing. Like just in this place that I couldn't quite understand and I couldn't deal with. But what happened was we had to go and pick up his ashes from the crematory. And I get there, and my brother was not at all prepared to deal with my level of curiosity, because I got in this place and I'm like, this is a person that I've never been able to ask questions of before. This is a situation I don't understand. This is brand new. I have to know. And so, I asked him, I said, could you show me the furnace or the oven? And I said oven because I'm an idiot. But, can you show me the incinerator, the furnace, whatever you call it? And so he actually walked me through his whole process. And so we were back there. My brother was standing next to me, utterly horrified, like hating me for asking these questions. But he walked me through how hot it gets. He showed me the inside. He showed me the pilot light. He then showed me that once it's all done, how he sifts all of the ash into a thing and then puts it into this sifter and has to get out things like rings or screws that were in bones or this, that, and the other. And he picked up a bone that was in that sifter, and he was like, you'd think that this is really hard. And he just crushed it between his fingers, and it turned to dust, and it fell down. And my brother ran out of that room because that was a moment for him, I think, because it was for me, just in a different way, just the mortality of it, what's the word? How vulnerable, how weak, how easily broken we can be. And so he ran out, and then I wish kind of that I'd walked with him, because then he continued the tour, and he goes to this cooler, and he's like, okay, so this is where we hold the bodies before we take care of them. And so there's just this cooler, this freezer filled with bodies. And I'm just like, this is so bizarre. It's so interesting. I'm very interested. And then I saw a body bag that was half filled. And I went, tell me what's in that, because I don't know why it's half filled. And he goes, it's a 6-year-old boy.
Oh.
And I go, and I think that was something that, even though it's very dark, very macabre, it was very affecting to me, because it was another level of understanding my own mortality and understanding death in some way. I'm so glad my brother didn't follow us in there, though.
No joke.
That would have been bad.
Yeah.
Poor
But
guy.
so when I saw, like, I was looking for, like Jessica said, I was looking for a mortician at first, because I was curious about these different processes. But then I saw your Twitter feed, and I saw the taxidermy. I saw that, and I'm like, this is kind of the level of interest that I have. I'm curious about death and how people react to death and how they memorialize. I love the cultural aspect of it. One question: have you ever been to Hollywood Forever Cemetery? Have you been to Los Angeles?
Sadly, I've done 1,000 online tours of it, but never been yet. It's on the list.
What's ironic about it, though, is my brother is the one who took me there. And so, Johnny Ramone is in that cemetery, and his headstone is him playing guitar and like rocking, like there. And you walk through this giant cemetery, and there are people who are absolutely crazy famous, the people who aren't. And if you ever get a chance to come to the United States, that is definitely one you should see. And you said you've looked at it online, but
yeah.
Let me. So sorry, that was a lot of rambling. I apologize. Have you ever had that sort of interaction yourself with like a close family member or anything that was close enough for you to have your curiosity piqued to that point? Or do you think that you wouldn't go there?
In terms of the death process?
Yeah, or am I just a bad person who was too curious at the wrong time?
No. Not at all. Not at all. I think that the closest I've been, I mean, I haven't lost a parent, so I can't empathize on a very practical level, but it's a horrible, horrible thing. But for a time, I lived with my grandmother, and I was her carer for about 4 years. And so from being her carer and looking after her while she was alive, just doing basic hygiene needs, making sure she had company, things like that. And it was, I think, that experience pre-death, I think, was just as affecting as the experiences after. Because I think caring for someone as they reach the end of their life and seeing how the body fails, but how the spirit kind of still stays strong, I think that's a really, really important and very privileged position that I found myself in. Yeah. So when she died at home, and it was quite a prolonged period, she was old, but being able to be there by her bedside as her consciousness went, as she became non-verbal, things like that, that was very affecting to think, there's no coming back from this.
Yeah.
You know, she's gone, but her body's still clinging on. And then after that, when she had finally gone, having that interaction with her body and keeping her in the house for not as long maybe as I would have liked, but keeping her in the house for a short amount of time afterwards, I found to be very, very helpful. And being able to, because I'd said my goodbyes while she was unconscious, but to be there and be able to see her body and be able to kind of see the finality of it, but also acknowledge mortality, I suppose, in different ways, that acknowledging my own and thinking that's going to be me, but also acknowledging that it was right. And I think that's quite a hard thing when someone's, especially in pain, or if they're suffering towards the end of their life, to feel a sense of relief on their behalf.
Yes.
I think is a very powerful thing, and a really weird, uncomfortable feeling to kind of process, that someone you love, who you want to be around forever, has gone, but you realize how selfish that is, and how selfish we can really all act when we're dealing with the death of someone else. So that was kind of my main interaction. But like you said, with the funerals, we'd spoken about what she wanted when she died. Some of the things that she did want, she had an amazing sense of humor. You know, I think a lot of people saw her as just a little old doddery lady. She had an evil streak to her. She was brilliant.
It's my favorite. Evil old lady.
Oh, completely. She would completely play the part and go, "Oh, it's lovely to see you, dear. It's really nice." The second they're out the door, they're going, "The state of them today. What on earth are they bringing that? Why do they think I care about that? Go on, put the kettle on. I need to have a talk about this."
It's a woman after my own heart, right there.
Brilliant. But having, like, knowing what she wanted, some of those things were to leave, let's say, certain notes to people, which would have upset those people should they receive them. There was certainly a process where I thought, okay, that would be hilarious to do that, but I'm dealing with this death in a different way because I've had such an immediate interaction with it. So maybe leaving this offensive note on so-and-so's doorstep would make me laugh until next week, but might really, really upset them. And I might make an enemy for life, because they'd say, no, she was lovely. She was a lovely old lady. Why on earth would she want that? So even in her funeral, even down to the flowers, I knew what she wanted, but to push that on my family, who were saying that, no, these were her favorite flowers. No, she liked these. And you have to sit there and go, well, I know you're wrong, but it's coming from a good place. Or maybe it's coming from a selfish place, and then you have to weigh up what's worth fighting over and what's not, when it's already a really emotionally charged event. But I think, definitely going with my granny from death to burial, and then she was cremated, but I wasn't able to have the tour, which I'm very jealous of. I've been to many crematoriums, but never got to see the cremulator at the end of it.
I'm telling you,
I'll pull some strings eventually. I've seen old ones that aren't used anymore. I've been in one.
It was so fascinating, because the fact that they sift it through the thing to make sure they don't get any screws or stuff, and then it goes down into a grinder, and it's just like there's just all these little things that I'm just fascinated by, and I'm like, I know my brother's just dying to get out of here, but I'm like, I have to ask. I'm not going to have this chance some other time. But speaking of your grandmother wanting to leave notes, one of my plans is to
brilliant. I'm totally doing that.
Is to absolutely go on Twitter and make a bunch of scheduled tweets far into the future, so that after I die, I'm still tweeting and just throwing people off. That's definitely my plans. But as you say, you kind of watched your grandmother pass and you got to know her. One thing that I would add to that is we need to write down what we want. We need to have it in our hand. We need to have people know exactly what we want. That way there are no arguments, because there was a lot of stuff that came up with my family, like I said, but luckily I was able to say, he wants this. This is what he wants. So that, definitely write it down. But as for, watching your grandmother leave even before she had passed, I think that may be why I wasn't in the same state as my brother and sister, because I lived with the man. I just recently, I think maybe a year and a half before, moved away from home. And so I had known him very deeply. And before I even left, he was no longer there. He was moving, he was talking, he was doing things, but my dad was gone.
Mm.
The man I knew was gone. And so when he died, it was one, because he'd had some strokes that he didn't know about. And so he was essentially, any of the pieces that you knew were no longer there. And my siblings didn't know this. They didn't see it firsthand. And so when he passed away, I was very mad. He was 66 years old. He wasn't old.
Mm.
And what had happened was they did a hip replacement and the doctor screwed up. And that's why he passed. And, no one else has quite said it that way. I know that that's what happened. I know the doctor screwed up. But when he passed, I was mad about that fact. But beyond that, I was so relieved for him, because he was not happy anymore. He hadn't been for a long time. He wasn't there. And so when he passed away, because get this, so we had to put him in a home because there was no way for us to take care of him, because we just did, like, medically, we couldn't do it. We couldn't afford to have nurses come in or do any of that. And this old man, do you know why he had to have a hip replacement? Because he was trying to escape, and he did it periodically.
Okay. I have things to say.
This old man, who was very skinny because he'd stopped eating and all of this, he watched the guard, or whoever, I don't know if they call it a guard, put in the passcode to the door enough so that, so he knew the passcode. He used the passcode, and then he climbed and jumped over a 6-foot fence. And that's how he broke his hip.
No one is more spry than an elderly person escaping from a home. And I know this for a fact. These people turn into NFL players. And they're the tiniest, most frail little people, and they will bowl you over. My very first job was in a nursing home. I got caught smoking in the school bathroom when I was 16. And my dad thought, if you go work in a nursing home and see all of the old people coughing and hacking, you won't want to smoke anymore. Well, little did he know that the old people give you cigarettes. So that did not work out the way that he planned. However, I got to spend a lot of time with elderly people, and I think that was really good for me, because I understood, like, being old was not something to be afraid of. It was actually a privilege. And there's something called sundowner syndrome, which a lot of the people who have dementia go through. When the sun starts to go down, a lot of the old ladies think they have to go home and cook their husband's dinner. They're trying to get out of there. And these are clever escape artists like you would not believe. My goodness. So yeah, I really got a very interesting experience out of that whole deal. And I will tell you, no one can escape like old people can escape. They will get past you like that. So watch your old.
Well,
but one thing I genuinely have appreciated about the Victorians is that they were very comfortable with death, and they were around it, and people still died in the home. And they weren't as disconnected. Like, we're so afraid of it in modern culture. We're terrified to see our old people pass away. Even though this is such like a perfectly natural part of our lives, we shunt it off into other places so that we don't have to witness it. And as a result, like a person like me, I've never been around that enough that it is terrifying to me, And so I recommend that young people do volunteer in nursing homes and other places, and get to know and befriend some elderly people. They're very interesting. They have very dirty senses of humor. And the idea of your grandmother wanting to leave mean notes to people when she passed, just warms the little cockles of my heart so much. And I'm like, yes, this is my kind of evil. Like, I'm very into it. And I think it's a great crime in our society that we're not with our elderly when they go. And I think it's a great privilege that you got to be there with her when she passed and when her consciousness went on. Like, she went on her journey, and you were there to be with her when the door opened for that. And I think that's lovely. And I also just wanted to make the remark that, age and corruption is not of our bodies is not a thing to be terrified of. It is aging is a great privilege. Not everyone gets to do it. Some of us knock off very young in very odd and weird circumstances. So if you get to be that age, you've really you've beaten the odds, and good for you. If I get to be old, I think that's a great privilege, and I can't wait to be mean and secretly mean. That's so great.
Absolutely. There's a freedom. There's a freedom afforded with age.
Yes.
I think,
Yeah.
where you can pretty much get away with anything.
Yeah. There was
babies
when
and old people.
I think it was Queen Anne. I'm not sure which queen it was. There were many long-standing queens, but she had in her age had a rivalry with some other lady, and she wrote her a very mean letter, and the lady was so upset by the letter that she died on the spot when she read it. And I was like, God, old women are vicious.
Yeah.
And I just sort of loved the idea that she was mean enough to kill a woman.
Yeah, that's next level. That's very impressive.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Power. The queen was so mad at you that you just died to get away from it.
So what's very interesting about what you do is you curate these different stories and pictures with burials and beyond. And the most recent one I read was about the taxidermy polar bear that was used as a mint mascot, which is taxidermy is so fascinating to me. I don't know if you noticed, I have a jackalope, which is the Southwestern American cryptid. But I would love to have an actual jackalope mount in the back. They're so expensive. But you have combed through a lot of stories. You've combed through a lot of these little anecdotes. Are there any of them that you've come across that are your favorites, or that made you go, this is maybe the best thing I've read when it comes to death?
I think there's always something. I'm always getting excited by something. I think I'm constantly trawling. There was the demon cat that's meant to live inside the Capitol building. that I found a few months ago and was like, well, this okay, demon cat, I'm sold. We need to research this. So, which again, as an English person, it doesn't really come up in conversation. So I don't know if you're both going, oh, of course, the demon cat. Yeah, we all know about that.
I've never heard
but
of
I'm
demon
Googling
cats.
it.
Yeah.
There's little cat prints everywhere.
Yeah, supposedly there was a demon cat. It's gone on for centuries, I think, at least since there was a point where instead of security, like trained security in the Capitol building, they had just kind of drunk soldiers that they kind of just bribed to say, look, can you do a shift? And these soldiers would say, oh, something just brushed up against me, but there's nothing there. And then as from those stories of soldiers feeling something against them, or hearing or seeing a blurred little creature, then it became, oh, there's DC, the demon cat. And then with all these folkloric things, it's been built upon, and in a couple of slabs of concrete in the Capitol building, there are tiny little cat paw prints that I think have made it onto the official tour now. So you can go and visit the sign of the demon cat.
Nice.
But so everything from that to, when if you're scrolling on social media and there's always these really ridiculous photos that say, did you know, in whatever year Edward Mordrake was born with an evil head on the back of his own that whispered terrible things to him at night, and he committed suicide age 32. Yeah. And then I see those and I go, probably didn't. So let's have a look. And that's how you get an essay on Edward Mordrake, who is always doing circuits on the internet, because someone, I think it was Ripley's Believe It or Not, got hold of the story and made a really great wax effigy of this man's head with this sort of mangled Voldemort style skull on the back of it. And it turns out that it has English roots, and there was a man who collated folk tales, mainly from around, I don't think it was from all over, but there was quite a lot from Norfolk, of things like the Great Fish Woman of Norfolk and the almighty ladybird of the north, you know, these ridiculous sort of cryptid type things, none of which have been picked up by social media because they're just a bit too ridiculous. They're a bit too crazy when it's, you know, like the hideous worm child, which is like everyone's going to go, no, you're mad. But Edward Mordrake, he really caught people's imaginations, and it turns out that he was just an invention. But this story of this man with an evil head on the back of his own that tormented him daily by, it was whispering unimaginable evils into his own ear. It catches people's attention, and you think, oh, I want to tell that story, but also I want to find the root. I want to find out who invented Edward Mordrake. So that was a fun one. So yeah.
So
there's always something that's interesting.
One of the interesting things to me is the cultural differences in death. I think that, you know, between, you know, America and England, they're not going to be hugely different. There's going to be some, obviously, but there are extremely interesting death rites and rituals throughout the world. There's one that I've seen a few times where they will exhume their ancestors and parade them around town.
Peru, they do that.
And then there's some places, and there are some people in America, I'm pretty sure, who will have their dead, you know, embalmed or whatever, but they do it in a very lifelike way. And so you'll walk into the funeral, and your buddy is sitting, your dead buddy is sitting there in a chair wearing all of his favorite stuff, doing something that he loves.
Yeah.
And it's just so fascinating to me that even within, like, American culture is kind of a misnomer, because there are like 300 American cultures. And, I mean,
300 million.
There are at least 50, and at most 100 million,
324 million like people. So maybe each unto his own culture in a way.
But it's just so fascinating to me that Americans kind of collectively, in a sense, with some exceptions, obviously, are so afraid of death, because it's interesting, because there are people who are in the Christian mind who see death as the enemy. You know, death is something that we're to overcome. Death is an evil. And then there are also people within Christianity who believe that death is a good, that is, you know, the entrance, the gate to something much better. And so, have you done much looking into different cultures and things like that have interested you, that have made you go, oh, wow, I would have never thought about death that way?
Yeah, I think, well, like you said, any culture that has a very physical and direct interaction with the deceased, like you said, a lot of countries in South America do like cleaning of the bones and brushing of the bones ceremonies. And it's those sort of pictures that I find, they're what pique your interest, and they're also what gets taken out of context most commonly. So I find those really interesting. But a lot of, like I say, Greek and a lot of Jewish death rituals. I'm by no means an expert on it, but I'm fortunate that a friend of mine is. And yeah, seeing different ways that people show reverence to the body, especially within a religious context, I find really, really fascinating. That it's a privileged position, and people within a certain religious community will be given the privilege, and it's unpaid generally within these communities, of cleaning the bodies and preparing them for burial. And there's a real appreciation of not only the deceased, but the people who give up their time to look after the deceased or hold an interest in their burial rites. Whereas I think you're right, in a lot of situations that have a more Christian basis around them, even just showing an interest in burial or in cemeteries, even if people were buried with, you know, full Christian service, whatever their particular religion was, and it was all seen as very above board at the time, to show an interest in that posthumously, as it were, is seen to be quite a horrible quality in someone, or that
Right.
if someone shows an interest in death in general, as in death practices, death culture, death rituals, or an interest in working with the dead or helping the dead, that's seen as somehow being like a corruptive element to your personality, like it's associated with some evil force.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you can, in trying to improve things and improve end of life care, you can also really ostracize yourself in a lot of European and Northern American communities, I feel. But I think anything where you directly interact with the body, whether it be removing the remains to put them in a receptacle so someone else can use that plot, or if it's, like you say, or like Capuchin monks who were mummified and held up within the walls of their monastery for hundreds of years. I think anything where people are confronting death in a very loving and reverential way, I think reverential is really the key word, I find very interesting and very comforting when there's autonomy added to that. So I think it's very different when you say, like, cleaning of the ancestor's bones, because that is still the ancestor. That ancestor has autonomy, even though they're passed. But also when you get catacombs and bone churches, like the Sedlec ossuary.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, that's beautiful and really interesting, but for a different reason, because it's complete removal of the self and complete removal of agency. But it's also a reflection of people's devout faith, because they became the church. I mean, there's no greater privilege, really. If you're within that community, you become their place of worship. So I find that really interesting when you introduce like religious divides and religious intent.
The relics of the saints too, how they'll preserve the finger bone of this person or that person. And even in the it's called the antimension, which is the surface upon which the Holy Eucharist is done on Sundays in the Orthodox Church. There is usually the chip of a bone of some saint or other that is brought from the bishop and sanctifies this space in which you can do the Holy Eucharist. And at our church, we have the Grand Duchess Elizabeth from Russia, and she was killed during the Bolshevik Revolution. And the Bolsheviks, for the people, the high heads of state types of people that were killed, the Bolsheviks would put their bodies or splash their bodies with acid so that the remains could not be interred properly, relics could not be found of them. And I think it was in 2008, the remains of the royal family, Nicholas, Alexandra, the girls, and the son, had been found, but were in a terrible state because they barely were able to get DNA evidence off of it, because they had recognized, the Bolsheviks at the time recognized that if these relics existed, these remains existed, it would present somewhere for people to gather, some vestige of the old royal dynasty that people could come to and pay respect to. And so some 110 years later, after this event happened, what was it, 80? I don't know the exact timing. But the Russian government took these small bits of remains and interred them in a church. And there was a huge religious ceremony, because we recognize on some level that these remains do hold power for us. They hold somewhere for us to gather in remembrance. And there is, religious or not, it seems to be universal amongst our cultures that the bones of our ancestors represent somewhere to gather. And so, I think that there's a lot to that, the reverence of the bones, sort of a recognition of we're all moving in that direction, Yeah. I love the bone churches. They're wonderful and beautiful. I agree.
They're fascinating. Well, and you mentioned, the differences between, someone who shows any interest in death or these ideas. They're kind of looked down upon by different types of people. For me, I'm Christian. I have a degree in biblical studies. I think death is fascinating. I think that skulls are beautiful and cool and interesting. And I only have one little one right now, but I played I'll say it the English way, but that Van Gogh painting that I used for the art for this episode, I'm going to have an American traditional version tattooed on me because I it's so fascinating to me. But you're not wrong, because my mom hates skulls. She says they're death, that she says they're evil. She hates snakes. And so even though I have a rattlesnake on my arm, she hates that. She's going to hate the new one. There are these symbols in her mind that equate to these horrible, terrible, corruptive things. And I'm just like, this stuff's cool. And so I definitely understand. But that's the people around you that you haven't, like your family, friends, not the ones that are also interested in this. Have you gotten any weird feedback from being fascinated by this, or has anyone been rude?
Extended family have never understood me, but I think that sounds so. They've never understood me. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not like
because I'm so
girls.
deep and emotional. I think with me, especially because I've been involved with the goth subculture since I was 12 or something. I'm certainly not. There was a point in my life where I was wearing corsets every day and big boots, and now I've become more academic. I'm lazy and I love pajamas. But I think there's an element of that when it became an academic interest and kind of a professional interest, that a lot of people kind of dismissed it as Kate's trying to shock. And it was always that you don't actually like it. It's like I was told about this the other day. I was told when I really got into the Sex Pistols when I was about 12 or 13, and I just discovered proper punk, and I thought, this is amazing. I'd never heard anything like this. And I was telling a friend at like a theatre club, and her mum said to me, no, you don't like the Sex Pistols. No one likes the Sex Pistols. People only say that to shock. I was there at the time and I know about this, so don't be stupid. And I thought, well, no, but I like the Sex Pistols, you know. So it's a very glib example, but when you're saying no, cemeteries are fascinating, there is a point where like friends of older relations and extended family go, yeah, you like cemeteries, don't you? Oh, spooky Kate. And I'm going, no. There's great cultural and social history here. But my immediate family, like my mum, my stepdad, and my sister, they took a while, especially when I got more interested in collecting a lot of death ephemera. So I collect a lot of funeral cards. I collect a lot of mourning jewelry, hair jewelry. That cabinet, there we go, behind me. That's full of hair jewelry, mourning jewelry. This is all mourning stuff. When I first started bringing bits in, there was, let's call it a school of thought, that they were either evil, like you say, like I was bringing in like a totem of death to celebrate it, whereas really what I mainly say about anything relating to Victorian mourning is that it's born from sentimentality and it's born from love. Yes. But it's unusual, you know, that we've diverted ourselves so far from a culture that is our own, that was far more healthy in their interpretations of grief. I think. Whereas,
I agree.
So with that, my family have kind of come around now, especially in terms of the jewelry, because that's seen as quite a nice ladylike thing now, and not just Kate's collecting the hair of dead people. So we've come on leaps and bounds.
My grandmother passed down her jewelry box to me, and in her jewelry box are little pieces of braided hair that belong to reposed people who I don't know of and will never meet. But at the same time, I recognize that she didn't keep these things out of a ghoulishness. They're representations of love.
Yeah.
And so I will keep them. I'm not going to discard these things. They're great symbols of her love, you know, and as if I love her, I will treasure the things that she loved. There's also a few oddities in there, like the nail from a dog and other things. But at the same time, I recognize, like, to most people, yes, this would be sort of ghoulish trash and should be discarded, but they are symbols of love. I think you're completely right about that.
Well, I hate to be the nerd who who quotes a comic book movie thing, but there was I don't know if you watched WandaVision, Kate, from Disney Plus.
I didn't, but I
But
think I might know the quote that you're going to say.
but at one point, Vision says, "But what is love? Or no, but what is grief? But love persevering."
Oh,
Yeah.
that's lovely.
It's
Yeah.
very. And I remember hearing it, being like, "That's such a better way to look at grief than the way we typically do." Because most people, when you're grieving, cannot understand your grief. They cannot understand what you're going through. When my dad died, a friend of mine said, "Yeah, well, you know, my dog died, so I kind of understand." I don't think you do.
Mm.
You can't understand what this is. And I don't understand it the same way that my brother does, that my sister does, that my mom did. And so it's all very interesting because I think it's very individual. And grief is individual insofar as a lot of the feelings are the same, but the way that you express it, the way that you work it out, is almost always tied to how you loved that person. And in that, it's a very individual expression that I think grief is terrifying. But
Mhm.
when I have the moments of grief that I still have with my dad, that I will always have, it's like my brother may grieve that he didn't have enough time with my dad because he was only 66. I'm grieving what I view as sure missed moments, but also where I failed, because there are things that before he died I failed on, and people will say, "No, no, you didn't. Don't think that way." It's like, no, no, no. There are ways that I failed the man, and I am working through that. And part of my grief is reconciling myself to him, even though he's not actually a part of this situation, if that makes sense. We're not talking, we're not chatting, but grief is not something to be afraid of and not something to be pushed down purely because so many people find it inconvenient, because people tell you to get over it. People tell you have to. Grief is one of the greatest learning periods you can have in your life, because the way that you learn to deal with that colors your whole existence. It colors how you view humanity. And so that's part of why I was excited to talk to you, because it's hard to have a smart conversation about death these days because people are afraid of it. They're so afraid of death that they push their old people away. And that's so sad to me, because if you look at the history of the world, back when we were all tribes to several hundred years ago, like there was, or 100 years ago, maybe even less.
No, we're still
The
tribal.
old,
But go on,
the
sorry.
old, no, I'm not talking about tribalism. I'm saying until that point, we didn't cart off our old. We
Right.
became their carers. We became the people that loved them to the grave. And now the vast majority of, I don't know how it is elsewhere, but maybe not the vast majority, but I feel like a majority of Americans, when their parents get old, they throw them away in a big way. And it's sad to me. And I think we can do better by humanity as a whole and our parents, because there's so much more to life and to learn, and grief and watching that passing, like you said earlier. Is there a better lesson in life than dealing with death?
I think that's the final big one, isn't it? It's you. If there's one thing to make you appreciate all that you do have and all that you did have with that individual as well, it's to watch the process of that coming to an end. And it's the only finality really in life that is completely inescapable. I know they say death and taxes, but
Yeah.
people do have a good go at evading taxes. But with death, there really is no coming back at all. I think, like you say, with grief, I think the way that we approach the dead nowadays, I think it's changing in a very positive direction. And I think that memorialization is returning in a more positive direction in terms of keeping aspects of the individual. Like we're seeing a bit of a resurgence in things like hair jewelry, but in a far less elaborate way. And we're seeing people retain ashes as diamonds, things like that. So I think we're slowly getting back in touch with the dead, but in a very commercialized, familiar sort of way.
Are those his glasses?
These are my dad's glasses. The only two things I asked of his when he passed were his glasses and his Bible. Because if there was any constant in my dad's life, it was that he couldn't see for shit. And every morning, without fail, he woke up. I don't think he had the breadth of understanding that I do with my degree, or that some other people do. But that man woke up every morning at 5 a.m. and the first thing he did was read his Bible. And so when he died, I didn't want the TV or this or that. I wanted this and the Bible. And those are going to be things I'm going to keep. His busted old Bible and his glasses I'm going to keep. And they're next to my desk. And I've never thought about why I keep them there. But I do. And so it's interesting. I'm learning something as you're speaking.
When I was 16, we went to Graceland, which is the house that Elvis Presley owned, the property that he owned. And at the very end of the tour is his grave, which is on the Graceland property. The tourists walk through and pass it. It's him, and he's on either side with his parents. And it's these 3 gravestones. And they're playing this god-awful, I don't know what the instrument is, but they used to play a lot of funerary music on this piano-like thing, harpsichord. So there's this horrible funerary harpsichord music that plays very loudly in the room as these masses of tourists pass his grave. And I thought this guy was haunted all of his life by his fame, and even in his repose. He's sort of like placed in this terribly loud, populated room. So I found that rather, like I said, I've been using the word ghoulish a lot today, but I thought that was particularly ghoulish. And the item in the tour that I found the most, I don't know, reverent or reminiscent of the man was a television set that he had shot once in anger. I don't know what was on the TV that he felt the need to point a gun at the screen and shot it. But this item, I remember looking at it and staring at it and seeing the hole in it and thinking, this is an item of him. This is, you know, I mean, like, I'm not a particularly big Elvis fan. My aunt was, and that's why we were on this tour. But I remember getting to the grave site in there and being like, this is horrible. I want to get out of this room as soon as possible. And it didn't have anything to do with it being graves or anything like that. It's just the irreverence with which this was being treated. Sort of not recognizing who he was as a person at all, that this fame had haunted him into his death. And here we were all taking photos. Like, people would put their kids in a line in front of the graves and then snap a photo. And I thought, oh God, get me out of here.
It's kind of the commodification of celebrity and death, which I think you see a lot in, probably not to such an extent as Elvis. Also, shooting a TV is possibly the most American thing I've ever heard. So there's no wonder that he is, you know, like an unofficial saint. Really is. I presume there was an eagle flying by at the same time.
Like screeching eagle, and he had a beer in his hand and like shot the TV.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I think with a lot of other celebrity graves that are in public spaces, particularly in like Père Lachaise cemetery in Paris, where you've got Jim Morrison, Oscar Wilde, and things like that. The way we interact with those, I think, is very interesting. That's kind of we don't see them as people because we still in our minds see them as other. So even in death, when you say it's the great leveler, in death maybe it is, but certainly in memorialization it isn't. But the Elvis blasting incident does sound. It sounds like in the film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where you're going through the tunnel and of kaleidoscopic sounds and everything's screaming. I think that's it's very fitting in a horrible way.
The moment was pregnant with meaning. There were so many layers going on there that, I mean, honestly, when I was in front of the TV, I stood there for a long time looking at it because it did feel very memorializing. It felt like an item of his life. I was connected to him through this item, and I was standing there in this quiet place of reverence. And then the graves were this totally opposite feeling, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. And I just what you're talking about, the memorialization being the key factor, that's for the living. That has way more to do with the living than the dead. The dead, is, for all we know, they don't know what we're doing with their bodies or might much care at that point. So all of this is for us and how we want to be maybe seen after we go. And I know being in that graveyard, that is the opposite of what I would want. No harpsichords, anyone, if it should come to that. Not one harpsichord, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's certainly an element of people wanting to, trying to put this in a far more intelligent way. I really can't. After someone dies, a lot of people who maybe were just passing acquaintances in life suddenly want to stick their oar in and be, I am the most grief-stricken. I once saw them in a supermarket. So I think that certainly reverence of celebrity is the most guilt-ridden stage of death care and memorialization, because there will be people that you remove the sense of self of the celebrity, you completely remove their agency, because especially in the case of Elvis, maybe he would wanted to have been scattered or been put in a communal cemetery elsewhere, but there would have been people who would have had enormous enormous social pressure, much like the Victorians before them, to conform to something that's seen as appropriate.
Right.
I think, which families fall into the kind of really uncomfortable trap of doing as well, when it comes to, well, they wanted this, but what will the neighbours say? What will the people in the community say if we don't do something far more elaborate and conventional?
See, I think what Elvis really wanted would have been to be cremated and then put into a bullet and shot into a TV.
Possibly.
I'm gonna reconsider that for myself now, I think.
I think, hey, well, you may have to come to America for that.
Yeah, I finally live the American dream. Yeah.
My husband wants the Viking burial. He wants to be put on a long ship, set out to sea, and then a flaming arrow fired. And I'm like, they're not going to let us do that. And then I think a couple of years ago in Maine, they passed a law that this is a form of burial that people can have, that you can be buried at sea in a burning Viking longship. And I thought, gosh, things have the attitudes toward death are definitely turning if we're allowing these sort of old school pagan. My husband is not pagan. He has no connection to the Viking culture. He just thinks it's cool, and he knows it bothers me when he talks about it. But at the same time, like the variety of ways we might be placed into repose is expanding. And I think that that's a really good thing, because the sort of very Christianized method of coffin, burial, church service doesn't reflect the vast number of cultures that we, we're a global world now, people coming all together from different places, and we're all not going to be sort of satisfied by that monochromatic way of being placed into our final repose. So, but yeah, he'll be lucky if we have the money to do that kind of thing. So
she brings this up, and maybe you know this. Did the Vikings actually do that? Because I see that and I'm like,
good question.
Do you happen to know?
I really don't know, but I do know that a few years ago someone did try, on 2 instances, someone tried to give a pet a Viking funeral and caused quite a substantial fire.
Oh my God.
So that didn't go to plan. And also, I think someone tried to give their friend a Viking funeral. And I think what people don't get with the idea of this is the heat required to burn a human body is so much higher than you really anticipate. Like cremation ovens, cremation furnaces reach really extreme temperatures, like you say, to be able to just turn bone to powder.
Right.
So if you put, let's say, your mate on a dinghy with a bit of straw under him, he's not going to burn in some big elaborate pyre. You'd have to do a lot of research into exactly what types of dry twigs and what sort of boat you'll need, because otherwise you'll just have quite a charred body washing up downstream and there'll be a murder inquiry.
God. Yeah.
So I think for all of the loveliness of, wouldn't it be amazing to go out like a Viking warrior, and you'll go up to Valhalla and everything will be wonderful.
Right.
Or your mate will get charged for wasting police time and there'll be a big inquiry. But it's a nice idea.
It's a valid point that I think I will bring up at the dinner table tonight.
Yeah.
So one among these other things, the stuff that you look into, like we talked about briefly before the show, is the spiritualism, and especially the spiritualist, the historical spiritualism that happened back in the day. I would love to talk about that more, and probably maybe we can talk you into having a conversation again later about that, because that's fascinating. I'd love to hear it from the Gothic literature, the historical context. That's fascinating. But one big question is, what do you think? I mean, you write this blog, you present these ideas, these stories. What is the big thrust for you to share this? What is it that you want people to understand about death and these other topics that they're not understanding right now?
I think the main thing, especially when I write about cemeteries, or if I write about any of the burial cards I have, or any of the mourning pieces I have, is that death is about people, and death is about sentimentality, and it's interesting for starters. So if you find a memorial card within, because I do a lot of talks for like family history groups and things like that, I really want to get across that none of this is scary or silly or also should be exploited, but it's inherently interesting and it's inherently human. And if I can get people interested in something that they thought was quite mundane, like a burial card, and then be able to say to them, okay, well, let's talk about the card. So the card is like this design, and it was produced by this person, and this symbolism means, because it's got the hourglass on it, that means life is fleeting, because it's got, a wreath on it, that's triumph over death. But also, let's look at the person, let's look into the censuses, and let's really track that person down through the records that remain, and present their life, or everything I can find on it, within the context of their time, which is something I really enjoy doing. So I think if people can slightly adjust their mindset, I mean, my whole blog isn't serious. I crack jokes all the time through it. I've got my podcast came out the other day on my Patreon about safety coffins. And I'm just talking about how everyone was just dead jack in the boxes if any of these patents were ever put into action. So it's kind of, let's look back at history, but let's not make it really exclusive. Let's not make it this standoffish sort of thing. Yeah, not everything has to be so dry and so fenced off just for very twee academics with twiddly mustaches. This is for everyone, and it's interesting and it's important, and it can be fun. Yes. I think that's the main thing as well, is that we can laugh at death. Laughing at death and laughing at creepy, spooky things is healthy and should be encouraged, I think.
I think that was the driver behind my horror movie challenge, and why I think people are fascinated with horror movies, because while these topics are taboo, there's no denying that the horror film is this huge genre, because people are fascinated by something they don't understand. And horror movies are sort of expressions of that horror and humor and things of that nature. And so that's maybe a safe way for us to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours like connecting with the idea of death. We get a little scared, we laugh, and then you can turn the VCR off, turn the TV. Did I say VCR? Oh my God.
You can do. I've got one just over there. So
well,
I'm very modern.
right. But then you get to turn it off, and it's safely within this realm of fiction, and I think that's why ghost stories continue to be so popular, and things of that nature.
Do you have any personal ghost stories?
Do I have any? I do. I have my one ghost story, which
Please share it. If you will.
it always makes me feel a bit uncomfortable because I know there'll be people watching who go, "Oh, she's insane." Okay, that's fine.
I'm used to that.
To be fair, we've all told a ghost story at least once
Yeah.
on this podcast, so people know what they're getting into here.
Also, the name of the show.
Exactly. It's
Mad
very
Ones.
fitting. It's
We're good.
very, very fitting, yeah. Well, my ghost story, I've always got to say, if it could be disproved to me, if someone could explain, oh, of course you saw this because of X, Y, and Z that was happening at the time, I would be perfectly happy to accept that it was all a hallucination, and I'll carry on with just as much enthusiasm for ghost stories and dead things as I did before. But my main interaction with ghosts was I was staying at my sister's house, which was just a really standard post-war semi-detached house near Grimsby, and it built up this activity within the house because they ultimately ended up moving because of it. They moved from the bedroom upstairs and moved onto a mattress in the living room because it just got too extreme. They couldn't bear to live there.
Yeah.
But it started with footsteps up and down the stairs in the house at night when no one was there, and the footsteps would go up and down the stairs, but then they'd come onto the landing and they'd do a circuit for a few hours. And it wasn't soft footsteps or anything you could misconstrue. It was like a fully grown bloke was walking up and down. And that's when you sort of think, okay, you were in bed, you were tired, but also my sister had a dog at the time who would sit at the top of the stairs for hours every night and watch something move about. So I think it's the dog that made me just completely unable to explain it. But these footsteps up and down. And then when things started getting, I used to stay over quite a bit. When things started getting more extreme, I saw a man in the corner of my bedroom in a blue suit. And I just couldn't move. There was a horrible burning smell as well. Not like burning flesh or anything like that, but like a acrid sort of burning smell. And then when I sort of just really hemmed myself in my bed, I felt sort of breath beside my face. And then that was the only time I'd seen it. But in other instances, my sister would never go to the bathroom on her own. She absolutely refused to. So when I went with her, that was because I used to stand outside the door and then we'd both go downstairs together. But she saw a man dead in the bath in that. And it was the same man. Apparently, we found out afterwards, we both told my mother what we'd seen and it matched up precisely. And it appeared to be someone who had died in the house a few years before, who's quite a young man. He was probably in his 40s, But that was my ghost story, really. My sister got it a lot worse because I think things started getting moved about and quite horrible things started happening. So luckily, just being a visitor, I only got to see something, whatever that may be, really on that one occasion. But even seeing that, it's the footsteps that creep me out. Still, even thinking about it, because I think you can explain away what you see a lot of the times, and you can explain things with pareidolia and so forth. But when you're hearing something and you're watching something else interact with it, that's scary because they're interacting with something that you can't see, and that did me. Yeah.
I've had a similar experience with a burning smell that was so strong and so sudden. And you follow it around trying to find the source. Like, did the dog leave something? Is something going on? And I remember coming up to the window and smelling this extremely strong smell coming from the window. And I thought, oh, something outside is on fire, or the chemical factory down the road is burning. Something's going on. So I go outside to see if I can smell the smell outdoors. Clean air, clean night air. And then right up against my window is this horrible, acrid, burning smell. And within a few minutes of I woke my husband up from his sleep and I'm like, do you smell this? And he's like, yeah, I smell it. Within a few minutes, the smell completely evaporated and went away. And I've had olfactory strange olfactory experiences that like I involved another person. I'm like, am I having a stroke or do you smell this? He's like, no, I smell it. And I'm like, okay, so I'm not having a stroke. This is actually happening. And then the minute we're sitting there sort of discussing what might be going on, the smell evaporates. I remember going the next morning and holding the curtains up to my nose and being like, do the curtains still stink of this? And it didn't. And it's hard for me to imagine that such a pungent aroma would not somehow be left behind on the fabric of the curtains. It was right there against the window. And my house was built in 1990. So, and it's like the same family lived in here for years before we moved into it. So like the idea that something built in 1990 is going to have like a haunting to it is a little dubious to me, but I've had like strange olfactory experiences as well that were just unexplainable.
So one thing is we talked about spiritualism just a little bit, and I don't know if you know this. Jessica is actually a very special type of spiritualist. She has certain deduction powers. And so the first question I have for you is, do they make good pizza in England, or is that not a thing there?
We have pizza. We've got that far.
Because I asked someone, I forget where it was, and I asked them about pizza, and they were like, the way they described it was so horrifying to me that I was like, they don't do that. Like, I think it was in Mexico. Yeah, he was in Mexico, and someone gave him a pizza, and it was maybe the most disgusting looking pizza I've ever seen. He just sent me a picture. So I'm just like, let me make sure they do it right in England.
Yeah, no, you're good. Obviously,
okay.
There are many places where you can obtain pizza of different varieties. You can get deep pan, you can get crispy.
Oh, good.
You can get healthy.
They're right next to Italy too. You think? Yeah.
But there's some place. I'm just saying. I've seen some things, and I just need to make sure that you have good pizza there before I ask you. If you were to order a pizza right now, what toppings would you get? And Jessica will do a reading based on your pizza.
Yes.
Right.
The pizza reading.
You thought you beat me, Jessica. You cannot beat me.
We'll go for a standard base. We'll go quite thin. And we'll go for mozzarella and roasted peppers with chili pesto and a little bit of rocket, so I look like I'm healthy. Or whatever you call rocket in America.
I think it's arugula. You're referring to a lettuce, right? Yeah. Okay.
Because I was like,
I'm a gardener, so I know.
And I put rockets on it, and I just blast it off.
That sounds very American.
It does, really. Yeah, it's one thing we should have switched around the other way.
So what this comes from is I made a cheeky little Twitter post one time that said, your pizza order tells me everything I need to know about you. And really it was just an opportunity for people to tell me what they get on their pizza, because people love to talk about themselves, and it's a great way to get like a big post going on. Yeah. And so ever since then, Cam is like, oh, really? I'm going to hold you to this. He makes me do some kind of like pizza type reading for every guest we have on the program now. So last time I beat him by just reading a random astrological reading off of the internet, but replacing every U with pizza. And so what he's trying to do is just basically make me uncomfortable. Let's see. So today's pizza reading is that you managed, and this is literally just what this says. It's oddly always really accurate. You managed to remain in shape by eating wisely. You will be able to ease a tight situation on the financial front by cutting corners. Pizzas are round typically, so that's actually good. Professionally, you are bound to do well. Congratulations on your PhD, my lady.
Thank you very much.
This trend is increasing for both professional and academic fronts, which I think lettuce on pizza is actually like excellent. And I've had so many good pizzas with like salad toppings on top of them. So, I know there are a lot of pizza purists who are like, anything that makes a pizza like three-dimensional in any way is like not proper pizza. But I actually really enjoy the salad pizzas. I think that you have very defined and exotic taste. So that's what I will. And yeah, so yeah, it's just.
I've never heard arugula called a rocket before. Like, I'm taking this with me, and I'm going to use it.
a rocket. It's just
rocket. Yeah.
Would you like some rockets with your pizza? Yes, I would. I'm healthy and cut corners financially.
Yes. Well, pizzas are round, so yeah.
So my favorite question is it's funny talking about this in the realm of death and the dark kind of things. But right now we are living in a time, and I'm sure this is true of all time, but it seems particularly poignant that we are living in a time where people feel hopeless for different reasons.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that are happening globally, locally, etc., that are huge bummers. And so I do like to try to find the hope in the situation. So my question for you is, it can be in any subsect of your life. It can be very personal. It can be global, whatever. What do you see happening right now? What is something in your life that is giving you hope, that is giving you the silver lining and the motivation to move forward?
Oh, I think I'll have to go for something just really basic and saccharine and sweet.
Good.
But last year, for my birthday, after 30 years of desperately wanting, I finally got a dog.
Oh,
and
lovely.
It's such a silly thing, because I'm working really hard on my career. I'm working relentlessly on trying to make Burials and Beyond something really big. But I think because I work alone so much, like I work from home, I'm a freelancer.
Yeah.
So to have a little constant, like a mad, very bitey little constant, but to have that little pal this whole year has just been wonderful. She keeps me in a routine every day, and she keeps me looking after someone else and being very receptive to someone else's needs.
Yeah.
You know, so I know it's nothing particularly globally impactful, but certainly for myself, having a little furry pal when I've had a bad day with work, or if I've had a bad day with something else, she'll still be there. She'll still want to lick my skin off, and she'll still she'll still wake me up in the middle of the night wanting some beef. So I'd say my tiny fluffy angry dog.
What is her name, and what kind of dog is she?
She's called Vaffles.
Okay, I like it.
And she's a mix between a Pomeranian and a Maltese.
Oh,
so
a little tiny.
She's the size of a shoebox, and she's just white fluff.
They are the smaller. The smaller they are, the more like evil and hell sent they tend to be. And so like the big dogs are all lovey-dovey, and then the little ones are like, I will eat you.
Yeah, she thinks she's an Alsatian, but she's lovely. She's so loving. That's good.
Well,
yeah, I'm a big dog person, so I think that's an excellent sort of like little bit of hope. It doesn't, when we ask that question, we always like to emphasize that it can be a personal thing. It doesn't have to be some like grand global, oh, well, they have golden rice in India, or, something like that. Like if it's just something that gives you hope, that's, a person who is on, looking for something might think, maybe I ought to get a dog, and that might improve their life. And so being a personal thing is totally okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on our show, Kate. I have enjoyed it immensely, and I don't know if you'll want to hang out with us anymore, but I do want to talk spiritualism at some point.
Always up for it.
The history for that. I want to do that, and I may talk you into coming back earlier than I thought I would, but not that I didn't think I would, but Americans in their rudeness. But no, I do think I want to probably talk to you sooner rather than later. But thank you so much. I think what you're doing is fascinating. I think that one of the things that Jessica loves, and something that I've kind of found a love for as well, is finding the sublime that's within the little things. Like when she told us about why spoons are shaped the way that they are, and why we have them the way that they are.
It's really fascinating. Spoons are fascinating, you guys. You don't know. Look into spoons. There's a deep history there.
but that's what you do. Like immensely enjoyed reading about the polar bear mascot and how there's one left and they had to do, and you got to take a look at it and why they chose this instead of what was it? It was called fox mints. Why didn't they choose an Arctic fox? Like, of all things, they're like, let's go with a polar bear. Your name is Fox. You're making mints. Like, there are ways to do this smarter, but it's fascinating to me. So I appreciate you coming on. I have enjoyed it. I'm sure that the nodding that Jessica's doing is her agreeing with me, which is always nice when women agree with me. But what I was gonna, if people want to find you, we know you're on Twitter at Burials Beyond. You have your website, burialsandbeyond.com. You also have a Patreon, which I believe that's where all your podcast stuff is.
Yeah, I post brand new exclusive content 4 times a week. So that's podcasts, videos, brand new articles. I've put up guides as to how to read a cemetery. So if you go, you can look at the symbolism and know things like that. I discuss weird and wonderful things in burial. I do a lot of ghosty things. I do mediums where I dress up as the mediums, and I give you little insights into weird jobs that I get, like when I was paid to pretend to be a Victorian medium for the day, and I take you along with me, and it's super cheap. I think it's like 70 cents a month to support my research.
I didn't know about that. I'm so excited. Oh my gosh.
Oh, do come along. It is relentless madness.
I love it. Well, at this point, I am probably going to start shilling our own stuff and what's coming in the future. If you want to stick out and hang out while I do that, you're more than welcome to. If you want to jump off, feel free to do that as well. But we appreciate you. It's been lovely. You're a lovely person in and out, and I hope we get to talk again soon. So
thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I'll lurk for a bit then, but thank you.
Okay. So with that, exciting stuff. The 100 Nights of Horror starts this Friday. We're kicking it off with the Netflix original movie, The Ritual, which was my favorite movie of the challenge last year. Have you seen The Ritual, Kate?
I don't think so. I've seen a film called The Ritual, but not a Netflix one.
It's on Netflix. I think it was put out in 2017, maybe. It's excellent. It's very Norse and kind of Lovecraftian in its horror, which I appreciate. But that's going to be coming up. We're starting that this Friday. Right before our outro for this week, I will play our little video that shows every movie that Jessica and I picked out, all 100 of them. We'll do that. Beyond that, if you want to find me on Twitter, I am locked down currently on Twitter. I have a lock on my account because I'm trying to get a job. And sometimes when you talk about things, people don't like that. So I'm just, keeping it safe. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that's at Cam Harless. If you'd like to follow Jessica, that is at Soup Canarchist. If you want to, those of you who are listening right this second, as we're sitting here with Kate, this is on Rockfin. Typically, we do Rockfin and YouTube at the same time. But since this is noon and we want to put it at our normal time, everyone who has a Rockfin subscription is actually watching it right now. And so if you want to watch things that are a little off the beaten path or on a different day or early, join Rockfin. You'll get to see it before anyone else. And it's a lot more fun that way. We also have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/themadOnes. We have, already did Twitter. YouTube. If you want a t-shirt, I think they're pretty cool. I need to get your address, Kate, because I'm going to send you one of our t-shirts.
Thank you.
I've got to figure it out because I need to make sure I have it on the .uk store first. I'm going to send you one. So I'll need to get some address that you feel comfortable sending me. I'm not a creep and I'm in America. But if you want one, wearethemadones.com/store. And we're also on Odyssey, YouTube. If you want to listen to it, it's on every podcatcher. And let's see, is that
it? If you're watching on YouTube, please hit like and subscribe so that we can get bumped up in the algorithm and other people can come watch our very interesting guests.
So with that, we're done. As always, I've been mixing up my phrase that I say on the way out. But as always, don't get arrested for doing stupid stuff.
You did that. You did a good job with that, man.
I meant to do that right before, but then I was like, oh my God, this is so long. I'm going to make some stupid commentary about that. I forgot to mention who's coming up. So that's all I need to do. Is next week we have Chris Amadon. He is a man who worked in the psychiatric field and feels like psychiatry is not a great thing. And it's very interesting to hear that from someone who isn't a Scientologist. So
Right.
we're going to be talking about that next week. Then we have a Harley.
I never know what's going on.
Yeah. Then after that, we have Harley coming on. We're going to talk cryptids. And then we have, right after that, we have Chris Baker from Inc. 180. And he is a man who was a tattoo artist and decided that instead of just tattooing for money, he tattoos off human trafficking tattoos that women have from their time being trafficked. That's going to be fascinating. And then finally, Kim Shang's going to come on, and we're going to talk about Stoicism and a little bit more philosophy. So sorry for bringing you back like that, Kate, but I just wanted to see your face one more time. With that, here's the outro.